Alright, welcome to my February reading wrap up. I read a total of 4 books. Off rip, I'm just gonna let you know what they are: The Invisible Life of Addie, LaRue, Quicksilver, Phantasma, and The Silent Patient. Normally, I read more than this in a month. However, I was in organic chemistry and a few other classes that had labs with it. So my focus was more so on school at this point and not actually reading. I did start Elantris by Brandon Sanderson, so I didn't finish it. Started reading 5, ended the month with 4. Totally okay with that, especially with what I had going on for school. So going into this, I just want you to keep in mind, I do use my own rating system now just because I didn't want to either rate multiple things or exclude things that I found important for the book. I'm just gonna post that like maybe here so you can look at it. So keep that in mind when I go through the book. We are going to start with I guess we'll do like the reading order. So we're gonna start with Phantasma. Off rip, let's start. I rated this, I think at first a 3, and I'm between like a 3 and a 3.5. That being said, I did enjoy this book. However, the way that I rate things, it was not a complete 4 to me, and honestly, it is because of how things ended. I'm going to do spoiler free at first, and then I'll get into more detail why. So if you haven't read this, I will break this up in the timeline. In Phantasma, our female main character, Ophelia, goes through the 9 floors of hell, basically to find her sister, who went into the same game as her to kind of try to solve their family issue that's going on. And I love the premise. I love trials and games kind of books. I love a book that has romantic interest. What kind of threw me off, me personally, I think I'm more of a slow burn reader or enemies to lovers, and that way you can like watch the relationship actually grow and change and mature. And I also just really like yearning. The enemies to lovers might say some stuff about me, but I am who I am. Anyways, I enjoyed Ophelia and Blackwell's relationship. I do think that it was more of infatuation at first, and it kind of just went really very fast. And it's kind of hard to get into without spoiling anything, so I'll save that piece for another time. I think the reason this kind of fell flat for me was the ending. I think the main reason why she was in the games in the first place kind of gets lost throughout the plot and not mentioned enough, and her mind doesn't go to that if it's supposed to be that important, if that makes sense. So like I said, very interesting take on things. I would recommend, and I will also be reading the second book that comes out for this for her sister. So going into the spoilers, I understand behind it they're like soulmates. She's the lost love for Blackwell. Where it kind of throws me off is how it just seemed like an infatuation and not really like a soulmate kind of connection. It was just kind of like, wow, he's hot, and they just jumped straight into it. She also, I personally feel like, forgot about her sister through a lot of the book, and it didn't really come back to that. She just kind of got sucked into Blackwell, which, understandable. I get there's 2 parts of the plot, but she finds her sister, and then she's there for like a second, and then she's gone. The ending, I think, is where it kind of lost me, because obviously he's the Prince of Hell, and they get to the end, and there's big problem, and it takes like half a page for it to be fixed. It's like, to me, it came across as a very large problem, and then all of a sudden it's gone, and everything is okay. So the ending kind of threw me off, but I did enjoy this. This was just under 500 pages, but it was a fairly quick read. I, again, would recommend and will be reading book 2. If I was going to convince you to read this book, my 2 favorite quotes from here are, "The dark is for people who are too cowardly to face their actions in the light." And the next is, "In a different life, I would have kept you until my internal soul withered away to dust." Next, I did say we were going to go in reading order, and I almost feel like this is unfair for the next 2 books, because The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Probably one of my favorite books I've ever read, to be honest. I loved everything about this book. I thought the writing was beautiful, the storyline was fantastic. Basically, this book is about a girl named Adeline, called her Addie, and she prays to a god in the dark, which is like number one rule, don't do. Like, very, very first page, never pray to the gods that answer in the dark. She does it. Her main wish was to be free, and she gets it, but any book that has a god that's willing to make a bargain and grant wishes, a lot of the times the wish is not in the way that you expect. She's going through life, she's immortal, but no one can remember her. And then she meets a boy named Henry, who all of a sudden can. And I love this book. Like, I think honestly, this is a book where I would give pretty much no criticism. I love this book so much. I went out and I got The Darkest Shade of Magic, which I am saving to read because I'm very excited. This 5 stars, it made me think. It had me, I read this book about a month ago now, and I still think about this daily. Like, I just love this book so much. It makes you think about a lot. And I think the contrast between, I'm so glad I just caught myself because that would have been a spoiler. But the contrast between certain characters and how they're portrayed in the book is beautiful, and it's done on purpose, I think. And one of my favorite parts about this, honestly, is there's book club questions at the end. And I can't say enough how much I love this book. Like, I'm pretty sure I've annoyed my 2 friends, Jess and Brittany, about just how much I love this. So, if I was going to try to convince you to read this book, I do want to say I was definitely heavily influenced to read this book by Dylan Joseph Wrights, or Reading. He changed his handle, I will tag him, but I like following book talk people like him because this was my intro to literary fiction. I found that on his Instagram. He popped up. I was curious. I saw some good things about it. I was like, you know what? Whatever, I'll try it. I'm so glad I did. I follow people like Dylan because we don't necessarily have the same book taste, but it gives a broader idea of what I would like in other genres, and I like having a versatile reading list, TBR. Okay, so if I was going to try to convince you to read this, I have a couple. I really like the quotes in here. What is a person if not the marks they leave behind? There's a defiance in being a dreamer. Nothing is all good or all bad. Life is so much messier than that. And the last one. But if you only walk in other people's steps, you cannot make your own way. You cannot leave your mark. And I feel like that is so relevant to Addie's bargain that she made, because it just makes you think. This book makes you, at least it made me think, what is your life worth? Like, if you were to ask for anything, what would you ask in return that like puts a value on what you think your life is? And it's also like, this book is kind of, I don't want to say like make this into a religious thing, but it really just kind of emphasizes the fact that if something bad or an evil was going to try to take advantage of you, it would be when you're at your lowest or at your worst. I love this book so much. All right, going into our next book, we have Quicksilver. Off rip, I gave this a 3. I think I ended up moving it to a 3.5. I really like this book. It is, I think, around 600 pages. 605. So I like this book. It was more refreshing for me, especially going from a biology class and 2 chem classes to this. It was a very refreshing read for me. it didn't really make me think much about anything. It wasn't anything new. It's like your typical, I don't want to say typical, because it does have its own nuances. It's nice she's 24 and not like 16, but Saris Fane is our female main character, and she's pretty much a beggar on the streets. She steals whatever, like the classic, I don't know, I feel like a lot of fantasy stuff, there's a lot of just very poor female main characters who end up from going from nothing to something big. I like stories like that, but it is one of those. She meets Kingfisher. I think, honestly, my biggest complaint right now is our female main character has a Fae name, and our main character, Kingfisher, his name is Kingfisher. I will get back to this when I go to spoilers, because I have a theory, but just going his, like, I just hate the name. By the end of the 600 pages, I was annoyed that his name was just Kingfisher. She calls him Fisher for short, and it just got old very fast. For the writing of the book, super easy to follow. The world building, I think, was very minimal, but it worked. I wasn't confused about anything, which was nice. And the plot was easy to follow. Some things were predictable. However, I still enjoyed it. That being said, I do find that I'm pretty good with books and movies guessing the plot. It is nice when I'm wrong or surprised, but I didn't really find that in this book. I would recommend this to a friend, and I will be reading the next book that comes out. I thought this was a standalone, turns out that it's a series. I don't know how many there's going to be, but it's a series if you didn't. So going into spoilers, this is your warning. I don't think Kingfisher is his like real full name, because names like this have power. It's one of those kinds of books, full name things, I'm pretty sure. Similarly to Phantasma, the ending, I get fantasy is supposed to have a happily ever after, but I feel like these two just genuinely worked out too well. Like, I know there's still an issue in this book, 100%, but everything was okay that happened. Like, everything. Every single part of the book that was going wrong leading up to everything, and then everything's okay. Even Kingfisher with his Quicksilver in his eye is okay all of a sudden. That's another thing I wanted to bring up. I felt like his character was very inconsistent. And you might not agree with me on this, but I liked how he was. I liked the relationship that he had with Saris in the beginning when he was mean to her. Again, I know, enemies to lovers, whoa. This isn't really enemies to lovers. That's what I said. If we're going with the Quicksilver is making him crazy, and as time goes on, he's supposed to get crazier, it didn't really seem that way. Like, losing his mind wise, right? I feel like that wasn't very consistent. He had some bad times, yes, but majority of the time as he spent with Saris, I feel like that wasn't there as much. Like, as when this was initially introduced, like how bad the Quicksilver was, I thought it was going to be more of a problem as the book goes on. Not that they've finally randomly find a solution that works for him at the very end. And I'm not disappointed. I'm kind of just like, they spent the whole book looking for this, and all of a sudden it was with a healer that was just able to fix it. I realize it's probably going to go into more detail, but that was one of the things where I was just like, this kind of doesn't really make sense to me. Still enjoyed it. I thought it was a fun read. Would recommend. You know, I just thought of something. I know these are two bigger, more popular book talk books. This is just my opinion on the two. Please don't come for me. Everybody has their opinions. I enjoyed them. I would recommend. They're just not with how I rate higher on the scale. I also will say I have been watching more anime lately, and I feel like I'm kind of comparing with these books, or books in general, with how character arcs go with some of the stuff I've been watching and really how just more connected it feels with those kind of characters, and then kind of comparing it to this. But with that being said, I also think I'm more used to something bad happening and a really cool character, like there's some kind of loss. So I will say that. So if I was going to convince you to read Quicksilver, here are my favorite quotes from this book. There are two kinds of forever. One is heaven, the other is hell. It doesn't matter what I do, choose your own version wisely. I don't want happy and bright, I want real. Never forget monsters thrive best in the dark. Ooh, okay, last one for February. The Silent Patient. Thriller. This book is about an artist who has a seemingly great life, and then all of a sudden she murders her husband. And our point of view is from Theo Faber, who is a criminal psychologist that wants to work with her. Alicia is still our main character, but the book is a mix of Alicia's journal entries and Theo working with her. I love this book. I rated it 4 stars. The only reason why it wasn't higher, I will get into when I go into the spoilers, because I have a very strong opinion about this and involves tropes and such. So I will give you. Basically, Theo is working at one institution and hears that Alicia is at another, but it's not the best institution and they're at a point where they might be shut down. Even though he has a very promising career, he transfers over in hopes to work with Alicia. If you couldn't guess by the title, she doesn't speak to anybody. She kind of just goes about life, and the few interactions that she has had where she's been reactive, it's been extreme and she's hurt people. So people are kind of, the staff in particular, don't really want to risk taking her off medicine and actually trying to help her in a certain sense. You're reading Theo's point of view, his thoughts on everything, and then you're reading her journal and it goes back and forth, and I think it ties together very well. I do enjoy Theo as a character in general. He is kind of a broken soul type character, just grew up really harsh, is going through some stuff in his adult life as well. And he is a criminal psychologist. Quoting my own therapist, she said people who have been through stuff kind of make the best therapist, or people who help others work through their issues. I'm about to go into spoilers. Here's your warning. So my biggest gripe about this when it's described is unreliable narrator. Don't get me wrong, I love that kind of book. It's why I picked it up in the first place. But when you describe a book as having an unreliable narrator, you're kind of giving away one of the main plot points to a book, because I'm like, oh, I like Theo, but oh, I can't really trust him. So you're already going into a sense of like what's going to be inaccurate or what's going to be wrong. Going into this though, I will say I thought it was going to be, again, spoilers, click away if you haven't read it. I thought it was going to be Alicia narrating, and then we couldn't trust her because she's a hospital patient. But it turns out it was Theo. This made me just think about what was going on in Theo's subconscious, or just how he was consciously, because he had a choice to not work with her at all and then be free. She wouldn't have said anything, he would have been fine. It makes you wonder just how bad he was feeling about his wife cheating on him. I did think it was cool that Theo's wife and Elise's character kind of flipped in a way. So she was silent, catatonic, and Alicia started talking, being a person, and Theo ended up getting caught. I can't help but think that Theo wanted to be caught just because of how he is. I will say, if I did not know that this was an unreliable narrator, I probably would have given this a higher rating, just because it wasn't as much of a surprise what was going to happen, because I knew the trope, which is why I think these books shouldn't really be described as that, even though they are, because it gives away that something's not right. But this is very well written, would recommend, and I actually immediately gave it to my brother-in-law who's reading it. If I was trying to convince you to read this one, here is my favorite quote. Oh, two. Love that doesn't include honesty doesn't deserve to be called love. One of the hardest things to admit is that we weren't loved when we needed it most. It's a terrible feeling, the pain of not being loved. If you're curious about what I wrote for this, I am going to be uploading a February wrap up for my book journal, and that'll be probably next week, I think. I hope you enjoyed my February wrap up. If you have any thoughts about the books that I just talked about, please let me know in the comments. If you have differing opinions, that's fine, but again, don't come for me because I might have had a different rating or opinion on a certain book. If you're interested in more stuff like this, please feel free to follow along and let me know in the comments what else you'd like to see with stuff like this. I'm kind of still feeling this out in a way, but I hope to see you next week, and I hope you have a good read.